Is the Allure motorcycling stalling out? Now, I ask you this as a question. However, recently there was an article in Bloomberg News that made it a statement. Today, I want to share the article that was written. I also would like to share my views and get your opinion on what you think this article means to the industry and to enthusiasts like us who love to ride. Hello, my beautiful motorheads. Welcome to Feroz, where we inspire you to live fiercely. I'm your host, Annick. I came across this article in my LinkedIn feed. Someone within the industry had posted it asking for other people in the motorcycle industry to comment on whether they thought that this article was actually true or not, or that they agreed with it, basically. I read the article and I had some pretty strong feelings after reading it, which then made me decide to go and check out the author, whose name is Gideon Litchfield. When I went to go look him up, I pulled him up on LinkedIn and I found out that this guy's a longtime journalist. He used to be an editor in chief at Wired magazine. He's got a lot of credits to his name. He definitely has been in the game for a while as far as writing and journalism. When I went to go look at his feed, I noticed that he had posted the article to his followers so that they would read it, of course, right? And there were a couple of things that stood out for me if I go down here, which is this. He puts the article right here, and this is his comment when he wrote it. And I'm specifically setting this up because I want you to understand the context and why this article started to evoke strong feelings in me after I read it. Mr. Litchfield writes, quote unquote, some light weekend reading that is guaranteed to piss off a large number of motorcyclists. My account of my cross US road trip, end quote. Now I'm going to put this actual article in the show notes. And I have to say that although I'm doing that, I don't necessarily want to push traffic towards it. And it was not the easiest article to access on Bloomberg News unless you have an account with them. So I'm hoping that you can get enough of the sense of the article to be able to follow along. And for those of you who are not watching this, I will try audio wise to articulate what you're seeing on the screen. Okay. So looked up the author, see that he makes a snarky comment when he goes to post the article. Then I thought to myself, okay, I want to understand who is Bloomberg News audience because it's always interesting to know who is this person writing for. And it's important to put this in the whole context of the article. So I go to Bloomberg's audience. I did a Google search and they say that AI or BFF pulls up Bloomberg's audience includes global business decision makers, influential decision makers, and other audiences. So I saw that. Let's keep that in mind. And then the other thing I just wanted to see, which was ended up popping up further down, which is just their demographic. Audience composition can reveal the site's current market share across various audiences. Bloomberg.com's audience is 64% male and about 36% female. The largest age group of visitors are 25 to 34-year-olds. I was a little bit surprised, honestly, about the age. I thought that it would skew a little bit higher, but there you have it. Now, the third thing I did after reading the article, looking up the author, checking Bloomberg's audience, I actually wrote the author. And I wrote him both on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And I asked him a few different questions because I wanted to know with certainty what he was trying to aim for. And this is what I wrote. Hello, Gideon. I read your article, The Allure of the Motorcycle is Stalling Out. I have moto podcasts called Feroz, and somehow I dropped the A. I was wondering if you would be willing to comment on why you decided to write this article. If the trip was intended to celebrate your US citizenship, why did you decide to take this angle? The article could have gone in a number of directions. Also, how long have you been writing? What made you decide that you wanted to take up writing? Thank you, Annick. All right. Now, he does answer some of these questions in the article, but not specifically. I want to get to the nuance of some of the things that come up in the article. And I'm going to do my best to share this article that gives it an overview but doesn't bore you because it's a rather long article. The category of this was under weekend essay and beautiful graphic by Bloomberg. I have to say they did a great job with this animated graphic. The full title is The Allure of the Motorcycle is Stalling Out. U.S. bike sales never recovered after the recession. To figure out why, a new citizen put an American tradition to the test by Gideon Litchfield. And when he says recovered after the recession, that means the 2008 recession in the USA. If we take a look at this title, there's a couple of things that I want to bring up, and that is that Mr. Gideon has a long career in journalism. He understands marketing. He was an editor in chief of a big magazine called Wired. Somebody like him understands that there are ways to capture audiences and to drive traffic to your article. This title is a great example of when you put out a negative, it draws people in. So, for instance, instead of saying like the top 10 places to visit in Alaska, like a better, and there's probably like 50 articles that have a similar title to that, you would probably do 10 things you should never do in Alaska. And that would be much more inviting, right? So, this guy knows that he's starting off the article with a negative, and that is that the Allure is stalling out. So, the title is obviously very intriguing. He did an excellent job with that. But then he goes into the bike sales and then to figure out why he decided to take this trip. In the article, and it's actually not really true because he does the trip and then he basically decides that he hates motorcycling. Let's get into that. While I'm not going to read the whole article, I do want to read this intro because it really sets the tone, besides your snarky comment in him posting. So I quote, Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park is one of America's most magnificent roads, 105 miles of flawless blacktop threading through the undulating peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Built in the 1930s and just recently repaved to a velvety smoothness, it was intended to be the greatest single feature of the park. A bucolic drive for middle-class families newly discovering the freedom of the automobile. It is also, I discover, potentially lethal on a motorcycle. The speed limit is an excessively conservative 35 miles per hour, which conjured a soothing drone from my engine and meant that negotiating the many twists and turns required little concentration. The pristine tarmac presented no potholes to dodge. Cars were infrequent. Combined with the helmet visor, my polarized sunglasses turned the black road surface a hypnotically iridescent green, like a jeweled beetle's black. It was idyllic and spophoric. After my eyes drifted shut for the third or fourth time, I realized I was in imminent danger of crashing. So I pulled over in one of the road's 75 scenic overlooks, hopped over a stone wall, and stretched out on the grass in my leathers for a half-hour nap. Somewhat refreshed, I made it out of the park alive, but never have I been so relieved to return to the traffic-clogged highways. It was day 3 of a 3.5-week, 5,000-mile ride across America, and already I was having second thoughts. Well, Mr. Litchfield, that is quite the way to open up an article. You did a good job of capturing my imagination. You did a great job of setting up the scenario. And you also did a great job of showing me that you really think that you're just going to die on a motorcycle. I'm being a little bit dramatic because I think it warrants matching his drama in the situation. So as I scroll down, we have a picture of Mr. Litchfield on his motorcycle. And I'm going to slow down and I just want to point out a few things because they are going to be relevant as we move through the article. And that is what Mr. Litchfield has decided to wear. Now, he is on a Triumph Bonneville. It has a large windscreen in the front. It is not the bike that I would have chosen to do this trip. Triumph is an excellent mark of motorcycles. However, they have other motorcycles that would have been far more appropriate for such a long journey. He's also wearing a full set of Vantham leathers. I happen to own these leathers, which I purchased 25 years ago. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Again, while I love these set of leathers, I would never have worn them for a 5,000-mile trip. He did pack his bike appropriately. He has his luggage and his gear packed low, and it looks, fairly evenly, which is great. For doing a long trip, you want the weight to be low. And then lastly, he does have boots on, although I don't think that these are motorcycle boots. I could be wrong, but again, not what I would have chosen for a trip this long. And he is wearing a high-vis vest, which I do think is actually a great decision on a trip like this. He also has an HJC helmet, which I wouldn't have chosen this helmet. They make decent helmets, but for a trip this long, I would have chosen something that was much more comfortable. As I scroll down, I'm going to read another paragraph here. I quote, I had set out from New York City in May, bound for San Francisco to celebrate becoming a U.S. citizen. It seemed appropriate. Few things embody the American mythos of freedom, individualism, exploration, and daring so much as a transcontinental solo road trip on a noisy two-wheeled machine. I'm going to repeat that again. Quote, noisy two-wheeled machine. When I tell people about my journey, I see eyes harden with envy. Words like badass are uttered. Wild adventures are assumed and inquired about. But for me, the primary sensations of the trip were discomfort and boredom. Sitting on my bedside for hours every day, sweltering in the heat and shivering in the cold, with the endless roar of the wind in my helmet and the constant nagging fear that a momentary lapse in concentration would bring my motorcycling career and perhaps my life to an abrupt end. End quote. He goes on to write about how he rode for hours and he was wondering, who even enjoys this? And then, because out of his curiosity of wondering as he's riding and droning for hours, like, why do people enjoy doing this? He decided to look up sales data. I want to backtrack a little bit because he's complaining about his discomfort and boredom. And I want to go back up to, if I scroll back up to his actual outfit, which is the set of leathers and the particular motorcycle that he was riding. Now, while these leathers are of superb quality, they are not comfortable for a long journey. Leathers are obviously the most protective gear that you can wear, and Vanson is a fantastic company. If you have any issues with any of your products, you can ship it back and they will fix the gear, whether there's a hole, a tear, slid across pavement, they'll fix everything for a fee, which is beautiful. They'll replace zippers, great. But when you're in a long trip, it would be better to wear something that is much newer, higher tech, textile, that is breathable, but also Gore-Tex that has protective but high vis, like a lot of reflective portions on it. He could have chosen a better outfit, which would have really eased a lot of the discomfort. And two, this particular motorcycle, as we can see, is just not really made for a long journey. Again, this is kind of like weekend warrior type of setup. So I don't know why he decided to choose this. I don't know if he spoke to people. I don't know if he did his research. This is what kind of made me wonder, how long has this guy been riding? Because if he had just taken maybe a few day trips or long overnight trips, he probably would have pretty quickly realized that this gear is not particularly good. While expensive and of good quality, just not particularly what you would want on a long distance trip. I'm going to scroll back down. And like I said, he, in riding cross country, decided to look up stats. It seems as though when I look at the stats that he looked up, that he only looked at the US Bureau of Transportation statistics. In having talked to other people in the industry, there's obviously different data and it's very costly to do any data research. And also it is just based on brand new sales. And I talked to Sarah Schilke. We had a conversation about it in our episode, which was, I believe, episode 9. And one of the things that Sarah pointed out was that most of these statistics are based on annual sales of brand new motorcycles. So it doesn't take into account used bikes, and it also doesn't take into account bikes that are off-road or don't need to be registered, such as a dirt bike, a quad, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Litchfield then proceeds to go into the statistics that he found. And as anyone that's writing an article, you are going to, of course, pick very particular statistics to support your thoughts. His whole premise is that basically motorcycling is dying. And why is it dying? And he also says data suggests, which is not to say that it actually is, it's just saying that it suggests. And so when I go back and I want to say that what Sarah Schilke was pointing out in her interview was that all these datas are based on brand new bike sales. They are not based on used bikes, and they are not based on the off-road sector where in many states you don't need to register these motorcycles. It also doesn't take into account people or families that share motorcycles. So, a husband and wife might share a bike, or an adult and a child might also share a vehicle. While I think that these stats are a good place to start, it doesn't necessarily show the whole picture. And if you're looking for negative information, this is going to be perfect for you. And this is exactly what he did. So he goes in and he starts to talk about the statistics, and without reading everything verbatim, he does show that there's this chart down here starting in 2000 that goes up to, it looks like 2021, which this article was written in November of 24. So he is missing 2 or 3 more years, basically at this point, 3 years. The author goes into the data, and this is what he writes. I quote, "The data suggests motorcycling in the US may be dying. In 1970, the first year for which the U.S. Bureau of Transportation Statistics has data, 1.1 million new motorbikes were sold at retail in the U.S. From there, sales fell more or less steadily to a low of 178,000 in 1992. Then they began to climb. By 2007, they had surpassed 1.1 million again. But with the financial crash, bike sales crashed too and never really recovered. By 2021, the last year of available BTS data, sales had not reached even half of their 2007 peak. Adjusted for population, they were just 3.5% higher than in 2009, the year after the crash. There was a slight pandemic surge, but many people who tried motorcycling as a hobby soon dumped their bikes on the used market. So 2022 and 2023 are unlikely to be much better. I actually question that because even though there was the pandemic surge that we are all aware of, he doesn't cite anywhere that says that people dump their bikes on the used market. Now, any of us who have been looking at the used market, there definitely are more motorcycles on there and prices are dropping, but I wouldn't say that people are just dumping. Like, to make the statement that many people who tried motorcycling dump their bikes, he's not giving us anything here that's actually following that up. And I have a problem with that, right? Because it's easy for us to say that. Like, my feeling is, and this is my platform, right? So on my channel or in my podcasts, in my interviews, yes, we're discussing these things and I'm making statements. But if I was writing an article for Bloomberg News, which is very data driven, that I would actually make sure that that was for real. And where did you get that from? So the data that he is showing is this US Bureau of Transportation Statistics, which again, he's only showing from 2000 to 22. And then there's 3 more years after that. I want to just say that when you are trying to prove a point in an article, you're going to find information to support that view. This is what he's doing. He then cites that the European Union is kind of mirroring what's happening in the US during this time period. Further down, he had found an article by a gentleman named Jensen Beeler from 2019, and he quotes the article where Jensen Beeler talks about the market in 2019 and what he speculates. Now, I'm not going to quote the quote of an article that was written 2 times ago. So I'm going to kind of gloss over this a little bit, but basically the author's point in citing this article is that it's just questioning, could it be financial? Could it be low interest rates? Could it be a lack of interest? Could it be what the manufacturers are offering? Could it be car sharing? Could it be X, Y, and Z? But it might also have been generational, whether, baby boomers were aging out, millennials were just not that interested, which does come up as a topic and is an issue that I would love to explore in a future episode of Pharaohs. But this is where our author, Mr. Litchfield, inserts his own quote. And he says, or perhaps people have simply realized that motorcycling is just a terrible idea. After the author presents the stats, he goes back into talking about motorcycling. And it becomes very evident that he just doesn't like it. I read through this whole article and I'm going to just pull up parts, but it's very odd to me that you would take a cross country trip and basically hate motorcycling. Now, since he never answered my inquiry to him, I don't know if this was his first trip ever. I don't know if he just didn't really like motorcycling. I don't know if he just thought that this would be funny and people would read it because he was just basically, as he quote, pissing motorcyclists off. I don't really know. But he continues on in his article to complain about how motorcycling is just not that much fun. And this is what he says, and I quote, "For all its associations with freedom, a motorcycle is probably the least freeing form of transport there is. Aside from the danger, there is a litany of things you can do in a car that you can't on a bike. You can't carry much luggage. You can't go much more than 100 miles on a tank. You can't adjust the air conditioning. An outside temperature shift of just a few degrees can make it too hot or too cold. Fog or rain make it miserable, not to mention even more dangerous. You can't scratch an itch, blow your nose, take off your sunglasses, browse music playlists, talk to a passenger, sip a drink, nibble a snack, dictate a text message to your phone, sing, your visor fogs up, or pull over and tilt your seat back for a power nap. Road surfaces that car drivers breeze over without a second thought are bristling with hazards to a motorcyclist. Potholes, tar snakes, cracks, grooves, a lip between lanes where one has been repaved and the other has not. All these can wrest control from an unwary rider. Okay, the gear looks good, I'll give you that. Nothing turns heads like striding into a party in full leathers, but the gear is expensive, heavy, takes time to change into and out of, and needs to be put somewhere when you reach your destination. Blah, 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 blah. He continues on to talk, like basically complain about every part of motorcycling. So here's the thing. This is a valid point if you don't understand what motorcycling is about. One does not choose a motorcycle if they want car comforts. If you decide to ride a motorcycle, you understand what you're getting into and you're prepared for that mentally, hopefully physically, and you do the best that you can to make the situation as easy as possible. Now, this guy obviously likes the gear. He says, yes, the gear looks good. And he says nothing turns ahead like striding into a party in full leathers. Well, I'm sure, Mr. Litchfield, that there are some other types of parties that you could go in full leathers that are not necessarily motorcycle leathers, but I'll leave that up to you. As I scroll down more, we continue to go into him recounting the trip. So he talks about how he got soaked, how he was too hot, how he battled fierce winds. Like these are all parts of the journey, right? When you ride a cross country trip, you are going to be in all sorts of different weather patterns. You're going to be on different road types, whether they're really well paved, whether they're heavy with traffic, whether they're slick, like you don't know. And that is part of the adventure. He basically just takes paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of complaining about his situation. And I'm going to skip ahead. As I go down, they talk a little bit about the financial crash. The big upswing that happened in motorcycling was COVID. And everybody can agree on that motorcycle sales did have a huge surge, so much so that the industry was behind and not able to keep up with the demand of motorcycles. The next heading that he titles is Inconvenient Wheels. He basically says that Europe is doing it better because there's places for people to park their motorcycles and scooters. Yes, I actually would agree with that. In the US, they don't do much, or cities don't do much to help motorcyclists park. So we scroll down. He then goes into lane splitting. And then from there, he then talks about, let's see, better parking, lane splitting, blah, blah, blah. He then talks about horsepower a little bit, but again, not that relevant to the article. All right. And then he gets into electric motorcycles and talks about Harley getting into the game and then saying, like, of course, range is an issue, especially when you're going on a longer trip. And he keeps complaining about the sound of motorcycles. I think that's very amusing to me. And it's amusing because most people who ride motorcycles love the sounds of their engines. And then he goes into talking about that one of the threats that may be happening is this idea that on the horizon is, quote, self-driving cars. He also goes on to talk about, will that potentially ban motorcycles on the roads? Now, all this is conjecture because we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. He then starts to talk about that at a specific point, he came across a group of riders and they ended up, I think, just taking him in, which maybe some of you have had the experience of, that when you meet other people on the road, being the friendly and beautiful people and community that we are, that we bring people into the fold. And sometimes you end up kind of attaching and riding with somebody for a little bit. I find this part funny, again, because he talks about this experience and he basically has been complaining the whole time about riding alone and like all this stuff. I'm going to quote this quote. My conversations with them, and he means the guys that he was riding with, got me thinking of things I could have done differently. Now, this part I like because he does start to take a little bit of responsibility for his choices and why this trip may have just been absolutely miserable. So he goes on to say, quote, a Bluetooth helmet attachment, a more comfortable bike, a bunch of buddies to ride with, all of these would have made the trip more bearable, perhaps even enjoyable. That one day with the guys, I rode 560 miles, more than my double daily average. And while it felt like a lot, it also felt fine. Certainly on the loneliest road in America, where minutes at a time went by without seeing another vehicle, I was glad for their company. End quote. I want to point this out because he complains pretty much this whole article. This is like maybe the nicest thing he has said. And he admits that he had maybe made some decisions that were not the best. And I'm glad that he actually takes some responsibility for his poor choices. He sums up the article by saying, and this is the last paragraph, and I'm going to read this. He writes, quote, I still ride my bike. The best reason I can come up with is that it's just, well, sexy. Bikers transcend political affiliation and social class. From Christian Trump voters to queer anarchists, we're united in our love for our gear and our sense of belonging to a kind of monistic clan of fellow sufferers. Biking is pointless, perilous, and impractical. Yet each time I get in the saddle, I feel the frisson of joy along with, or perhaps identical to, the fear that this time could be the last. And I want to do more great American road trips. Next time, however, I'm going by car, end quote. I think for all of us, that's probably an excellent idea. Just go by car, Mr. Litchfield. Please, just don't do another motorcycle trip. I wanted to bring this article up because there's things about it that I find highly amusing. And I also want to have a dialogue with you guys to talk about this. And the things that I'm a little bit disappointed in is that Mr. Litchfield is on a huge platform. Bloomberg News has an enormous reach. And as we know from me looking up at the stats, it has a global business influence. The people who are primarily reading these articles are men 20, I think it's a 24 to 35. So here's the thing is that audience are decision makers. Now, when you allow somebody on a platform like that to talk about their experience, they are talking to an audience that may or may not have motorcycle experience. So they're taking whatever they're reading on this platform as this is the way that the market's going. I'm just going to believe what's written because Bloomberg has put it on there. I have a problem with that because I don't think that Mr. Litchfield is the best indication of what's happening in the motorcycle world. If you're following my podcast, you're an enthusiast or you love the motorcycle culture. There's something about motorcycling that's drawing you to this podcast. Had I written the article, it would have been a very different look at it. And I would have questioned, why is motorcycling not regaining the following that it had in 2007? But it would have been a very different take on it. Everything that he talks about is about the death, the danger, the inconvenience. Like, why would you do this? It's awful. Everything's awful. Life is awful. It's not an enthusiast. It's not somebody who would ride that would be the best person to cover this. It's like this. Let me give you a good example. I don't particularly love running. In my past, I have trained for half marathons and I've run them. And I put in the hours, I put in the miles, and I've run. Never once, even after doing a half marathon, have I ever called myself a runner because I know what the difference is. When I have real running friends and family members who are completely into running, like they're in it to win it. They're all about the sneakers, they're all about the training, they're all about going out for the miles. Like they don't think about other things. They're like, okay, yes, it's a fun day when I get to go run 10 miles. For me, it's not that fun. Now, would Road Runner magazine or Runner World magazine or even Bloomberg, would I be the person to write an article about running for Bloomberg? Absolutely not. I would actually be embarrassed to write an article from Bloomberg on running because I don't really know much about it. I don't get the same feeling that real runners have, so I don't think that I could necessarily weigh in. Now, I do say this all the time. Everybody's allowed at the table. So whatever your experience is, you can absolutely say it. Mr. Litchfield is allowed to share his thoughts and allowed to say what he wants to say. The problem I have, again, is it's on this large platform that influences people who are the decision makers in the world. A lot of these people are the finance people that make decisions on companies. They make decisions on where money is going to go. If you are presenting an article like this without presenting another point of view that says how great motorcycling is, what innovations are happening in motorcycling, or even, for instance, like he quoted the CEO of Kramer Motorcycles. Had he written an article for Bloomberg, I would make the assumption, again, all assumptions because nobody has responded to me. The only person I contacted, which was Mr. Litchfield, did not respond to me. If Bloomberg magazine had written an article on Kramer Motorcycles, the article would have been very different than this viewpoint that Mr. Litchfield has. Now, I'm a very small voice online. Itsy bitsy, teeny of no consequence. However, my point to this is that an article like this, I believe, causes damage. While he had written in his little blurb of putting the article on LinkedIn that, I know it's going to piss off a whole bunch of motorcyclists, I'm actually not pissed. I'm just really disappointed. And I'm embarrassed that this is what is being portrayed as the voice of motorcycling. That's it. You know, it stinks that he had that experience, but I also kind of feel like he set himself up for that experience. And, you know, it is what it is. It's a great story, right? I'm sure there were clicks, there's views. And like I said, I'm going to put the link to the article in the show notes. Not that I want anybody to go drive traffic to it. And maybe you got enough of the sense of the article in this video for that to be enough. He did a good job because he did incite a reaction. And as I said, this guy has a marketing background. He knows what drives traffic to articles, titles, topics. Just can't put my thumb up. Look at that. Things taking control and I don't even know what's happening. He knows what he's doing. Any of us that when we're looking at any of these things online, they're trying to drive a point. Even this video, I'm trying to drive a point, which you may or may not agree with. You can do whatever you want. Whether you agree or don't agree with me is totally fine. I would love to hear what you think about what I presented. Do you think that this is like a topic that we need to be talking about? Do you think that it's boring? Are you bored like he's bored riding? I want this podcast to be a give and take. I want to talk on topics that you guys find interesting, that you find compelling. The other part to me wanting you to comment is that I would like to know, is this of interest? Like, do you want me to do more of these reviews where I find articles online and I give my hot take on them? Or you're not that interested and you prefer when I talk on specific motorcycle topics? Or do you guys prefer the interviews? In my previous videos, you guys do have a lot to say. And believe me, I read every single comment. I appreciate everybody who takes the time to make a comment. I would hope goes without saying. Mr. Litchfield is a human person. And if any of us are going to comment, like, let's not, I don't want to attack his character. I don't have a lot of patience for that. And I would hope that when I'm making comments about his choice in gear, I'm not attacking him as a human being, but I'm just questioning his decisions on this cross country trip. In that perhaps he could have made it had he talked to other people or had more motorcycling experience, could have had a very different outcome to this. And I do question his motive, but I'm not attacking his character because I don't know him. I don't like when people do that. I think one of the worst things about social media these days is people just being mean to be mean. But I am questioning his motives with this article. I'm questioning why he made the decisions he made. If for some reason he ever answers my inquiries, I will definitely share that with you guys. And even more so, I would love for Mr. Litchfield to come on and sit down with me and do an interview, because I'm sure he's got a great story beyond what he wrote. And I would be very interested to know what his life is like and to know, did he just write this article to get clicks? And did he even consider that these types of articles impact the industry in a negative way? I don't know. They're all questions, right? So I'll leave it at that. And again, I truly appreciate every comment that you guys write. I would love for you to subscribe and like this video. Bloomberg News, huge following, huge spread of influence globally. Annick here on Feroz, little influence, little following. So let's grow that. Thank you for your time. And as always, ride smart. Ciao.